Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to motion 62 by my friend, the MP for Pierrefonds-Dollard, regarding Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims. I want to thank him for his leadership on this and many other issues of human rights around the world as chair of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. The bipartisan support we have seen for this motion is a testament to his hard work across party lines. And I am pleased to add my voice and my vote in support of this important motion. What does the motion speak to do? Madam Speaker, it consists of four primary components. The first clause asks us to recognize that Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims that have fled to third countries face pressure and intimidation by the Chinese state to return to China. The evidence makes this an undeniable truth. In the second clause, we are asked to recognize that many of the third countries these refugees fleeing persecution and genocide are residing in face strong diplomatic and economic pressure from the Chinese government to deport these refugees. Again, there is ample evidence to support this undeniable truth. The heart of Motion 62 comes in the third clause, which calls for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada and this government to undertake steps to expedite the entry of 10,000 Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in need of protection over 2 years, starting in 2024, into Canada. This is such an important measure. Madam Speaker, I have served on the Immigration Committee since I was first elected in 2015, and I know that we can't solve the global immigration crisis through resettlement alone. We need a multifaceted approach that includes humanitarian aid and diplomatic pressure to improve conditions on the ground. And many refugees want to stay near their country or origin. Hopeful conditions will improve to allow a safe return. So we need to support those refugee host countries who often lack the resources to care for large refugee populations. But the Uyghur community is facing an ongoing genocide. I was proud to stand with the yes votes in 2021 when this House of Commons voted to recognize this sad fact. Canada agreeing to accept these 10,000 Uyghur refugees fleeing genocide and most in need of protection is our responsibility as a free and prosperous nation. It is our duty as a democratic nation that tells the world we are a voice for human rights. It's a signal to China and to the world of who Canada is and where we stand, and hopefully also encourages like-minded countries to step up and do the same. Canada has always done our share in times of crisis. In the late 1960s, we welcomed 1,100 Czech refugees fleeing from the Soviet invasion. In the 1970s, 7,000 Chilean and other Latin American refugees found safety in Canada after political upheaval. We welcomed Iranian refugees after the overthrow of the Shah, Bosnian Muslims escaping ethnic cleansing in the Yugoslav civil war, and more than 60,000 so-called boat people following the war in Vietnam. And more recently, we resettled more than 25,000 Syrian refugees, are providing safe haven for thousands of Ukrainians, and are well on our way to resettling at least 40,000 Afghan refugees. Canada punches above its weight, Madam Speaker, but this isn't simple altruism. Refugees make Canada better. They enrich our nation, our economy, and of course, our lives. People whose families came to Canada through previous waves of immigration are today members of this House of Commons. They are giving back to this country with their service. In my community, the first waves of Syrian refugees found jobs in grocery stores, restaurants, and landscaping companies. Now, more than 5 years ago, they are opening their own businesses, running their own restaurants, hiring people, and providing employment to others. And they are becoming Canadian citizens. I've spoken here before about 2 Syrian success stories in Scarborough Center. Aleppo Kebab serves delicious Syrian food, while Crown Pastries has the best sweets in Scarborough, especially at Eid. I can't help but imagine what great things these 10,000 Uyghur refugees will achieve in Canada. One of them may even be the next chocolate king like Tariq Sadar. What is clear, though, Madam Speaker, is that too many Uyghur people will never have the opportunity to achieve their full potential, to realize their ambitions and their dreams. That is why Canada must act. Lastly, the final clause of Motion 62 calls for the government to table a report on how the refugee resettlement plan will be implemented within 120 days of the passage of this motion. Madam Speaker, I welcome this motion and its call for the urgent resettlement of 10,000 vulnerable Uyghur refugees in Canada. It builds on our recognition of the genocide occurring in Xinjiang and sends a message to China and its communist government that Canada and the world are still watching. And I hope Parliament will ensure the hardworking team at IRCC, who we have asked to do so much in recent years, have the resources they need to do all we ask of them. But as I said earlier, resettlement alone is not the option. Canada must go further to keep the plight of the Uyghur people in the public eye, to keep up pressure on China, and to rally our allies and the international world with all diplomatic means in defense of the Uyghur people. When the government released its new Indo-Pacific strategy, some pundits complained there wasn't enough attention paid to China. Indeed, the goal is to diversify our commercial and diplomatic interests in the region. And I recognize this may not be helpful to some of those with vested business interests. But I ask them, how can Canada have business as usual with a regime that is perpetuating genocide against an entire community, that puts a minority in re-education camps and then denies their very existence? How can Canada have business as usual with a regime that kidnaps our citizens to be held and used as pawns in business disputes? The answer is clear: we cannot. China must uphold its international human rights obligations. Human rights are universal. National sovereignty can never be used as a pretext or an excuse for the violation of the human rights. We cannot let the world forget that an estimated 1 million Uyghurs and other Turkic groups are in concentration camps in Xinjiang, where they are subject to forced labor, gender-based violence, and torture. Uyghurs who have fled their homes to third countries are still at risk of deportations. I have always been a voice for human rights around the world, for the Afghans fleeing the Taliban, for the Rohingya fleeing Myanmar, for Coptic Christians in northern Iraq, for the Palestinian people denied their basic rights. And I will always raise my voice for those in need. With my vote on this motion, we send a message: we will not look away. Thank you, Madam Speaker.